So, fun fact, apparently Shaggy is just a nickname, and the true first name of Mr. Rogers here just so happens to be Norville. Oh, what do you know?
You know we're gonna have to print a retraction now.
I haven't printed a retraction in 20 years!
Okie dokie, here we go again. The pain gets rolling quick, as the show opens with Fred accidentally exposing himself as he gets walked off to jail and everyone sees his teeny weeny. We then cut to Daphne as she hides a lot of money and longs for her friendship with Velma, and Norville has a sword, I guess. The title appears, and we transition to an ascot commercial, which is the show's way of telling us how Fred's family got rich, as well as justifying why he wears an ascot. And this is something that has actually bothered me for a long time in regards to Scooby-Doo. Ascots have been considered out of style for a long time, so whenever a new Scooby-Doo show comes around, the creators always feel the need to try and change or justify the fact that Fred wears a bright orange ascot on the regular. But here's the hard truth that you people might not be ready to hear. Fred can pull it off, and that is fine. You don't need to justify it, you don't need to change it, you need to accept it and embrace it. Anyhow, the commercial transitions to a news broadcast that is reporting on Fred's murder accusations. All the while, Velma watches while shouting at the screen to give her credit. However, it's then revealed that Velma's lawyer father will represent Fred in the trial. Velma is upset by this, but her dad insists on it because it will make them a lot of money.
That his delicate teen heartthrob good looks stem from the fact that he hasn't gone through puberty yet. Fred's a rich white guy with a tiny dong. He did it.
You didn't mention Fred had a tiny dong.
Oh yeah, real baby carrot.
You know, I'm actually so glad they finally did this, because whenever I go back and watch classic Scooby-Doo, the first thing I always think is, man, this is great, but you know what would make this so much better? If everyone made fun of Fred for having a small wiener. That would really just bring this from a 9 to a 10. So thanks, Mindy. This is exactly what everyone wanted.
You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah. It's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
What is the joke here? What was the punchline? Was that even intended to be funny? It's genuinely hard to tell.
I feel my hallucinations are like the return of high-waisted jeans. It took a while, but we're finally through the worst of it.
Man, they are just relentless with these jokes. They crank them out non-stop, line after line. I wouldn't make my worst enemies sit through such offensively nonsensical misery. Every scene is like this, but I'll spare you from most of them as to protect you from the suffering that I must endure. You are welcome. Velma now believes that her hallucinations are cured as a result of catching Fred. She then sees Daphne get dropped off at school by her LDMs.
Good Lord, it smells like the Playboy Jazz Festival out there.
And a kid's eating sheet cake at 8 in the morning. You thinking what I'm thinking?
Let's go get a sheet cake.
High five.
What is this writing? What are these jokes? This isn't humor. This is just people saying things in a comedic cadence. I know I just said I would spare you from these, but they can't just say things like that and not get called out for it. Anyway, Velma confronts Daphne and gives her a sarcastic apology for her dead friends.
Just to offer my sincerest condolences for the loss of your more popular friends that you picked over me. Stop.
Wow, what a rotten human being. Are they expecting us to like this character in any way? She then immediately asks Daphne to fetch her mother's cold case for her, for, quote, old time's sake, as she presents a best friend necklace that they both have. It's real somber and dramatic. The proper response to this would be, piss off, gremlin, you just insulted my very recently murdered friends. Unfortunately, Daphne doesn't go that far, but she at least only agrees to do it in exchange for $500. So there's that. Afterwards, Velma's dad has a meeting with Fred and his family to discuss the upcoming trial, in which he strategizes that they play up the notion that Fred is a helpless little boy who can't possibly be capable of murder. That's fine and all, but Fred also stated that he paid off the murder victim to not spill his puberty secret, so in theory, could they not just rely on the bank transfers as his alibi? That, compounded with the fact that there's no murder evidence or confession whatsoever.
The only reason people think I removed those girls' brains is because I basically confessed and have well-documented anger issues. I mean, what does that even mean?
In the show, Fred states that he did confess, for some reason, even though he didn't, and he's innocent, but the writers really want to have a trial, so here we are. Also, here's a fun tidbit. Fred's dad is voiced by Frank Welker, the original voice actor for Fred. Fred's dad is an old-fashioned manly man that is constantly disappointed by how pathetic and underdeveloped his son is, which feels symbolic in a meta kind of way. Later, we see Velma visit Norville's home, and we meet his dad, who doesn't look much like Norville, but he does resemble somebody else. Norville's mom is apparently the school's principal, and she has assigned Daphne's lesbian detective mothers to play undercover students in order to find a drug dealer within the school. We find Norville in his room, performing a live stream called Norville Snacks, in which he apparently eats snacks on camera. I suppose that's an Easter egg in a roundabout sort of way, complete with fun references in the chat box. Velma interrupts his stream to ask him for $500. He says no because he's giving all his money to his mom mom for her birthday. And because you don't just ask your friend for $500 out of the blue. Like, really? Norville's viewers get angry and leave him because he made Velma sad. They are wrong. Norville did the right thing here. However, don't build up too much sympathy for him, because he then schemes to sell a bunch of his stuff, then blackmail Velma into dating him in exchange for the money. Even poor little Norville can't help but be a pathetic, miserable bastard, just like everyone else in this show. While on said topic, Daphne admits to Velma that she is the school's drug dealer, and she wants to recruit Velma to help her get that $500. Yep, that's right. Daphne is a drug dealer now. Isn't that just what you wanted? Velma gets concerned for Daphne, because she believes that only white people can do that kind of thing and get away with it. Daphne is meant to be half Asian now, in case you couldn't tell. Velma doesn't want to help Daphne. However, Daphne intimidates her into submission. She then reveals that the drugs she sells are called Zoinks, Jeepers, and Mystery Machine. Isn't that lovely? Don't you just adore all these Easter eggs? We then watch as Velma Dinkley goes around school selling drugs to her fellow students. Thankfully, she's terrible at her job, because she can't help but be a hateful little troglodyte that keeps pissing people off with rude and uncalled for comments. She isn't even at least being clever with her insults. She's just taking the most obvious jabs at high school stereotypes.
Huzzah!
I'm sorry, Velma. I could feel you forcing that.
Yeah? You know what else feels forced? Your belief that you're the only one sleeping with the lead.
And so, Daphne fires her. Meanwhile, Norville is struggling to sell his stuff, so he resorts to selling his kidney. Meanwhile, we cut to the trial, where Fred acts like a shameful little idiot in order to convince the public that he's innocent. Unfortunately, Rain appears and makes him look like Hitler. Don't you just hate it when that happens? We then jump back to Daphne and Velma, as Daphne, after getting high on her own supply, tries to justify her actions because she wants to save up money in order to find out who her real parents are. So she's ruining dozens of lives because she has a curiosity. The ends do not justify the means. She is a terrible person. The show hypes up finding her parents as a big deal, but it's not big enough to justify being a drug dealer. If you really want to know that bad, then work at McDonald's for a week and get an ancestry test. Their conversation gets interrupted when her lesbian detective mothers pull tasers on her. They don't recognize the girls because they have these amazing disguises on. Daphne grabs Velma's hand to run, but they catch a case of the gay, so Velma gets tased. After that, a chase begins. This poor student gets his leg cut off again, then the girls escape. Norville prepares to remove his kidney, but a mysterious Asian man appears to rob the place. Gee, I wonder if the only other Asian in the show is in some way related to the other Asian person who was just talking about finding her family. Tune in to find out. The man attempts to shoot Norville, but all his Norville snack fans suddenly appear to protect him.
Isn't that convenient?
Back to Daphne and Velma again. If this feels like we're jumping around a lot, well, you're not wrong. These scenes are barely minutes apart from each other, if they're even that long. Anyhow, after escaping the lesbian detective mothers, they crawl out of some trash and have another gay moment. Then the writers attempt to hide blatant, lazy exposition within the cadence of a joke. But make no mistake, they are straight up telling the audience what is happening, as if it wasn't completely obvious already.
Wait, am I enjoying hanging out with you again? Or is it the high of moderate exercise?
Though I suppose the target audience for this show is the most smooth-brained amongst us, so I'm sure they would probably appreciate these sorts of handouts every now and then. Daphne calls out Velma for being too ignorantly judgmental, instead of actually trying to get to know and understand people for who they really are, which would be an accurate assessment, yes. However, Velma dismisses that claim on the grounds that she is the smart one of the pair.
Okay, easy, Dr. Phil. I'm the brains of this operation. You're just the look, style, and effortless charm.
I couldn't possibly imagine any conceivable way that she could be the brains of any operation, though I suppose Daphne doesn't set a very high bar. But now the two are apparently on better terms. So what else would they do except go back to drug dealing? But what do you know? The next client they approach is Velma's dad. Whoopsie. The Dinkleys go back to their house to argue about the situation, during which Velma explains that she needs the money to find her mother. Her father then volunteers to give her the money instead, even though it was established that he is extremely poor.
Dad says we can't even afford to buy me a second sweater.
But regardless, he states he will only provide the money if Velma agrees to help prove Fred innocent. Velma refuses because she doesn't want to admit that she could incorrectly prejudge someone, but then she realizes that's exactly what she did. But then she decides that she isn't wrong, and that he is definitely guilty, but then a couple seconds later, she decides that she is wrong and he is innocent. Whew, Shakespeare would be proud, guys. Once again, we are back with Norville, as Daphne's lesbian detective mothers reward him with $500 for catching the thief. How convenient. Unfortunately, Norville is an idiot, and returns the money because his fans caught the guy and not him. Dude, it's a free $500. You could at least give it to your fans. Or, you know, you could just give it to Velma without the blackmail, but whatever. Ay ay ay. Let's see how Fred's trial is going.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help me, Shonda Rhimes, I do.
I can only assume they did this because if that wretched creature actually did touch a Bible, she would most likely spontaneously combust. Velma takes the stand and goes on a monologue about how she misjudged Fred and a handful of others, which I do suppose counts as an arc for this episode, so good on you, show. However, then Velma goes on a tirade about how helpless and prepubescent Fred is, while getting a good laugh from the court. She then forces Fred to cut his own steak, and uses his helpless inability to do so as evidence that he is physically incapable of murder. So, Velma's big plan to prove Fred's innocence is to do the same thing her dad already tried, only now it just works. Truly innovative writing. Unfortunately, the mockery Fred receives from the court upsets him, and compels him to rant about how he could have murdered those girls if he wanted to, and as a result, he is found guilty. Well, wasn't that just a fun waste of time?
Wow, blonde-haired people have bad days too.
Later that evening, Daphne visits Velma to give her mother's file for free. During the conversation, we also learn that Velma stole a bunch of drugs from Daphne, and left a pee stain on her carpet.
Well, your fear pee stain is still on my rug.
Isn't that just pleasant? In the file, she learns that her mother was last heard of at Fred's house, so she once again believes that he is guilty. Suddenly, she gets another hallucination, despite believing that she was cured. So in order to save her, Daphne gives her a big ol' smooch, and they go on kissing as Norville looks on sadly from across the road. Thankfully, the sweet release of credits have arrived to free us from the pain of watching more show. Tune in next week for more terrible people doing terrible things.